Okay, Mr. Hugh McMillon. Last we were talking, weren't you in Nia Bay and you were mending on the fishing boat? So what Irishman fishes? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
You were mending the
Yeah.
thing, and then you started feeling a little queasy. A Navy guy feeling queasy.
Yes.
But then I just now learned you'd never been on a ship.
Never.
And then you
I
were...
was a coxswain in a whaleboat, though, in boot camp.
Okay, well,
I got
that's...
to say stroke, stroke, stroke. That was my naval sea
There, yeah.
experience.
So then you were up chucking over the rail.
Yeah.
Then what happened to you?
Well, 3 days later, we pulled into Astoria, Oregon, and I was grateful that I wasn't dead, although for 3 days I said, "Take me now."
Really?
Don't wait, do it now. Yeah, boy, I was really seasick. It's bad stuff. Anyway, from Astoria, I hitchhiked back home, and I had hit fishing boats all over the Gig Harbor, Tacoma, you name it. And I have decided I'm going to go UW. I've registered, and it's about for the January session. That would be 47. And
And you're a civilian now.
I'm a civilian.
Okay.
Yep. My bag is packed. I'm ready to go off to the UW the following morning. The telephone rings, and I answer it. This is about midnight. And, "Is this Hugh McMillon?" "Yeah." "Do you still want to go fishing?" I said, "Yeah, who's this?" "This is George Plancic. I'm the skipper of..." I don't know.
Croatian guy. It must be Gig Harbor, right?
Yeah, yeah. And he said, "If you want to go fishing, meet me at Pier so-and-so in Tacoma at 5 o'clock this morning." I said, "Okay, I'll be there." That goddamn drunken crowd is never going to be on a boat with me again. So, because an alcoholic didn't make the boat,
So there you are.
I managed to get aboard. I didn't even have to have my name changed to Itch. Or
Right.
Son.
Right.
And we would come in every Friday night. We'd fished in the Sound, disputed Sound. It was exciting. It was fantastic. And I thought, well, these fishermen they know I'm a young guy, I'm a college kid, and they're going to show me, that they're going to show off. I thought they were putting on a demonstration for me of pulling net out of the water. My muscles in my
Oh, geez.
forearms grew in 2 weeks
right,
by 1 full inch.
Really. Just...
Oh boy, that's hard work. That's before all the fancy stuff.
That, yeah, that was before mechanism brought him in.
Yeah, we were the mechanism. But I made $1,103 in 6 weeks, and that was more money than I thought had ever been printed. And I put it in the bank, and then I went off to the UW, which I hated, because I'd been used to being a big man on my high school campus. And at the UW, I wasn't even a grain of sand on a football
I
field.
totally know what you mean.
Yeah. And that didn't ride well with my ego. And about that time, President Truman signed 2 documents creating new government entities. And that would be September 17th of 1947. He signed creating the U.S. Air Force out of the U.S. Army Air Corps.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to fly so bad I could taste it. So I went out to McCord, I took all the tests, and they said, "You're one of us." And I hitchhiked by air, partly, and by thumb, another part. I wound up at Randolph Field, Texas, just outside of San Antonio, which is in those days was called the West Point of the Air.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah, and I they took exception to the way I flew the T6. We didn't go into primary and basic, we went directly into advanced. And I just couldn't handle that airplane, and they asked me to leave. Broke my heart. I wanted so much to be a great fighter pilot. On reflection, I was a lousy pilot, and I'm glad that they threw me out. Because when I came back, it was too late to register for UW, and I did not want to go to this little bitty school in Tacoma. It's the best thing that ever happened to me.
UPS or?
College of Puget Sound,
Yeah.
which is now the university.
Yeah.
And that's where I took my degree. And that's where I met a lady named Janice Grosser,
Janice?
and she is still with me.
Gosh.
And that started in 1948.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. And we've been together ever since. No. Yeah, I started ogling her in 48. In 50, we had our first date. And in 52, well, let's see. I went from UPS or CPS to University of California, Berkeley, where I was on practically 24/7 studying Russian. Literally listening to it under my...
Now, was that on your own, or was that part of...
I still had the GI Bill.
And you wanted to study Russian?
Oh, yeah.
That was on your own volition? You
Oh,
were not
yeah.
training with any
Oh, no,
organization?
No. I knew that I wanted to get into intelligence.
Okay, well, you knew that?
Yeah, and why? Because honest to God, when I was 10 years old at Park Avenue Grade School, that's 1936, Roosevelt was running for his second term.
Right.
It was an election year. And I was fascinated by the whole process. And there was a fellow running for Congress whose name was John Coffey. Now, this is the Depression. And John Coffey gave every one of his constituents that he hoped would vote for him a little can about that big, about that deep of coffee. And I thought, what a gimmick. I'm going to be a congressman. I'm 10 years old. I know I'm going to be a congressman. That's what
Really?
Everything I did was targeted for that. But I needed a gimmick. And what's a better gimmick than saying I was an intelligence officer with the Air Force, the Army?
I see. So that was
It was all,
building your resume.
yeah. Anyway, I say anyway a lot, don't I?
No, actually not.
At the University of California, oddly enough, Janice and her mom and her two sisters moved from Tacoma to the Berkeley area. There's a town down there, Astoria or something like that. I can't remember the name. Okay. Shame on me. And so we were continuing our courtship. And in those days, you did not wind up in bed with your loved one. That was just not done. So we were able to wander the streets of San Francisco when I wasn't in class. And then Janice and I, on a choo-choo train, came up from the San Francisco Bay Area, went into Portland, where one of her sisters was living, spent a night with them, and then took the train to Tacoma. And I drove her to what is now UPS, where she resumed her education.
Okay.
And I went off to the UW, where I was working on my doctorate. And when I was in my second quarter for that, I had an accident with my car, a 38 Ford. And I had no insurance, because I'm smarter than most people, see. So I decided I don't need insurance. This is a real brilliant move. Okay?
Yeah.
And that $1,103 turned into liquid. So I'm looking at, God, am I ever going to get a doctorate? So I went out to McCord Field, Mount Rainier Ordnance Depot. I'd worked at both of them in the summers doing different things. And I got to Fort Lewis, and I turned in my resume, which is very impressive looking. You know, it's got 8 colleges,
Right.
and all I have is a BA, but that's okay. It looks impressive. And the lady behind the counter at Fort Lewis said, why are you looking for what is essentially a laboring job? You're vastly overqualified. I said, oh, I want the money. I want to get my doctorate. You don't need a doctorate. And I'm thinking, who are you to tell me I don't need a doctorate? And she disappeared and came back and handed me a piece of paper on which she had scrawled the address for A2, Air Intel,
Okay.
G2, Army Intel, N2, Naval Intel, INR, State Intel. And I said, what's this C.I.A.? Shh. And that's how I got into C.I.A. I'd never even heard of it.
Because she'd written that on the paper and it kind of vouched for you to say contact them?
Yeah, she put the address down. She knew that I was probably qualified to be an intelligence officer.
Did you have to pick one?
Well, she just said, write to them.
And did you write to all of them or just one of them?
Well, I said, what is this C.I.A.? She didn't want me to say it out loud.
Oh.
And she whispered to me, because it was a brand new agency at that time.
Oh, okay.
And still secret. And so I applied, and I get a call, and I meet Miller Holland, who is in Seattle. He's a CIA rep. And Tom Culhane out of Portland. And at the time, I was working at just different jobs and different apartments. And I would get a letter from the agency saying, thank you for your application. We are processing. This is somewhat time consuming. We will recontact you. And then I'd get one, come back to DC. And I'd call them and say, you're paying, right? And then I'd get another one that 5 times this happened. And then the 5th time, I'm at Mount Rainier Plywood down in Tacoma. It is freezing, and I'm loading pieces of veneer into a dryer, and I get the telegram that says, we are no longer considering your application for employment with us because you are on active duty with the U.S. Air Force. And I picked up the phone and called Millard, and I picked up the phone and called Tom, and they said, I happen to be going to D.C., we'll take care of it.
Because that was wrong.
Of course, it was
Yeah.
stupid. And 3 days later, I got a telegram, come back to D.C., we'll cover it.
And that telecam, was that from CIA?
Yeah, yeah. And that's how I got into the agency. And that's a whole other story.
That is a whole other story.
Yeah.
Were you, but that must have been,
29 January 1952.
but that was a big accomplishment for you at that point,
It was
wasn't it?
huge.
Because you had wanted to get in there.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't really know, you didn't even know about CIA, you just wanted to get
Never
intelligence.
heard of it.
Right.
But this is down my line. And I was still thinking Congress.
Right, that was a means to an end.
Yeah, uh-huh. As a matter of fact, when I signed on 29 January 1952, on 2 June of 52, Janice showed up at Washington National Airport, believing that somebody would meet her there, namely me.
I would think.
And I picked her up and didn't have a car. We did this by bus. And I took her to where the apartment complex was, where I was living, and put her in an apartment with one of my colleagues, Rod Sweet, and his bride, because you didn't do those things in those days. And that was on her birthday, which is the 2nd of June that she arrived. And on the 6th of June, we went out to Bethesda Chevy Chase, went to a church with a bunch of our friends. And I'll give you an idea of what sort of people CIA people are. My colleagues, we were all junior officers in training, And they said, Hugh, we've decided we're not going to give you a wedding gift. Instead, we're going to have a reception so that your wife will know who you're going to be working with, which I thought was pretty wonderful. And we had it in Ruth Phillips' parents' house, which is a pre-Revolutionary War house in Alexandria, Virginia.
Huh?
And at 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody said, "This is your wedding night, Hugh. Are you going home?"
Wow.
Yeah,
So that must have been really a stately thing, right?
It was impressive. Yeah. And this is before air conditioning.
And what time of year was it?
6th June.
Oh boy, that's
Miserable.
yeah.
So on our wedding night, we wound up sleeping on the hardwood floor
Just to stay cool.
just to stay cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been back there. And
Horrid. Yeah. And then I started my career, which was fascinating.
You want to pause it right there?
Oh, we can go a little bit more.
We'll go a little bit more, okay? Because it's, we've got about 7 minutes.
Okay. Okay, anyway, we were living in an apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, which is a stone's throw from Washington, D.C. We saved our money. Janice was making more money than that. Oh, by the way, when
Well, she was making more money.
she was
You were
making
a hot
more
s-
money as a
you were-
secretary,
You were hot stuff, I thought.
let me tell you, when I'm being interviewed, Tom Culhane, bless his heart, he said, "Well, I guess I'm not going to be able to hire you, Hugh." And I said, "Why is that?" "Well, on your application, you said you would not work for anything under $3,000. And I said, "Yeah, that's true. And I've offered you positions that pay more than that, but you don't want those positions, the research and analytical stuff. You want action. Well, the best I can do there is less than $3,000. I said, "What does it pay?" $2,940. I said, "I'll take it." Now, let's understand, $2,940 a year.
No, get out
A
of
year.
here. Mercy.
And I owed everybody and his uncle money. But I managed to pay it all off.
And Janice was making more than you were.
As a secretary with a military surplus dealer from Argentina. Yeah.
But combined, you did okay. You got by.
Oh, sure. Yeah. We saved enough money so that on Washington's birthday, Washington, D.C. turns into a huge sale. And I had arranged to get out of the furnished apartment we were in. It was a lousy furnished apartment. To go into an empty apartment. And we still have the furniture. We're still using it. We furnished our...
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, you have to point that out next time at your place.
I will. This is quality stuff. It was on sale for prices that we could afford. So we equipped ourselves, and then we moved out of that apartment to another one over in Fairlington. And my boss, during my first year with the agency, my boss, George Kieswelder, whom they named a building after on the c.i.a.
Oh,
campus.
they did, okay.
He handled some really fantastic things. I couldn't understand, where did George go? He's on a special assignment. And he was on a special assignment. Anyway, George came in and said, "Hugh, your Russian really isn't very good." I said, "I know that, George." I said, "I'm sending you to Georgetown for a year." So I went to Georgetown University for Russian for a year.
You did?
Yeah.
For Russian studies?
Just
Or
Russian.
language.
Language. But
That was intensive.
it was intensive. It was taught by native Russians, people who got out before the roof fell in.
So
I
you were
reckon-
able to pick up the dialect and the nuances of the speech.
And I also had, I bought my first tape recorder and I set it with a timer So that 3 o'clock in the morning, the tape would come on and speak to me in Russian with a speaker under my pillow. And I had a huge vocabulary, and my diction was wonderful. The problem was I didn't know what I was saying.
Oh.
You know, I had the words.
That can be limiting.
I had the words, but I didn't know what they meant. Yeah. But it was. Anyway, my boss said, they put me in the Soviet division, Far East, which was exactly what I wanted, and for which I was qualified. And my boss one day said, I would love to take you with me to Japan, Hugh, but I can't because you don't speak Japanese. Would you be willing to go as a reports officer instead of a case officer?
Oh, that's all right.
I said, I'd be willing to go as the janitor, Jack.
Just to get to Japan, right?
Just get me out of here. The buildings we were in, IJKL, were along the reflecting pool between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. And they had been built as temporary quarters for wax and waves during World War II. They were not. They were a fire trap, every one of them. Just terrible. And no air conditioning. So I was quite happy to get out. Anyway, I went as a reports officer, and 6 months later, I went back to being a case officer. But we got me to Japan. And Janice came with me.
Oh, she did.
Oh, yeah. And a little vignette, this is years later. I came home from Langley, that's the new headquarters building, and Jan met me at the door and said, wait till you hear this one. I got a telephone call, and the call was, this is very embarrassing for me, Mrs. McMillan, but as Marshall's third grade teacher, I feel it's my responsibility to let you know that he is in pretty serious trouble. Really? How's this? Well, we were talking about the Far East, and he said, my brother Lance and I were born in Tokyo. Yeah. We were talking about India. That's where my dad rented an elephant, and we went on a tiger shoot.
Jiminy Christmas.
Doesn't this bother you, Mrs. McMillan? Not really. Well, I think Marshall is either fabricating or hallucinating or lying. Not yet he isn't. Then we talked about Egypt, and he said my brother Lance and I walked around the Great Pyramid at Giza. Doesn't this bother you? No, that's the life we lead.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't it?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, here in the Washington, D.C. area, you're saturated with people who live that kind of a life.
Right.
Diplomats from all over the world.
Right.
Yeah. But I thought that was one of the funniest things that I'd ever heard.